It wasn't a simple accounting error. It wasn't a temporary reaction to supply chain bottlenecks. It wasn't even a standard geopolitical maneuver. It was the mathematical inevitability of a sovereign debt cycle entering its terminal phase. The pattern is unmistakable. When a dominant power accumulates obligations it cannot pay through taxation, it chooses inflation. It chooses to dilute the currency. It chooses to change the denominator rather than default on the numerator. We are witnessing a quiet but massive shift in central bank behavior. Record gold accumulation, balance sheet expansion, new liquidity facilities with obscure acronyms. These are not signs of strength. They are the classic historical signals of a system preparing for a reset. The arithmetic is merciless. To understand where we are going, we must look at where we have been. We will examine 3 specific case studies where this exact sequence played out. We will map the 7 stages of currency collapse, and we will overlay this map onto the current global financial data. Think about what that means. History does not repeat, but the incentives of indebted governments rhyme perfectly. Case 1. Rome. The anchor date is 64 AD. Emperor Nero faced a budget deficit. The empire had stopped expanding. The plunder had stopped flowing, but the cost of the legions and the bureaucracy remained. Nero could not raise taxes without risking revolt, so he chose the invisible tax. He ordered the mint to reduce the silver purity of the denarius. It went from nearly pure silver to 90%. Then AD. By the 3rd century, under Emperor Gallienus, the silver content was effectively zero. The currency was bronze washed in silver. The result was the crisis of the 3rd century. Prices skyrocketed. Trade networks collapsed. Soldiers demanded higher pay to compensate for the debased coin. A legionnaire into 70 AD could no longer feed his family on a salary. That would have made him wealthy a century prior. The middle class was wiped out. Wealth fled the cities for the countryside. They moved into hard assets. They moved into land. The complex economy devolved into local feudalism. Just like the Roman crisis, the Spanish Empire found itself trapped by its own overhead. Case 2. Spain. The 16th and 17th centuries, the Spanish Habsburgs controlled the first global empire. They had access to the richest silver mines in the world in Potosi, yet, by 1557, King Philip II was forced to declare the first sovereign bankruptcy. The cost of maintaining global military dominance and fighting endless wars in the Netherlands and against the Ottomans exceeded even the vast inflows of New World silver. When the silver ran out, the crown turned to copper. They minted the vellon, a copper coin with no intrinsic value compared to its face value. The incentive was survival. The crown paid its debts in copper but demanded taxes in silver. The result was the price revolution. Inflation tore through the Castilian economy. A merchant in Madrid in the early 1600s saw the price of wheat and cloth soar beyond the reach of the common laborer. The productive economy hollowed out, leaving behind a nation of speculators and impoverished aristocrats, while the real wealth migrated to the banking centers of Amsterdam and Genoa. Just like the Spanish Empire, the Weimar Republic believed it could print its way out of an unpayable burden. Case 3. Weimar. Germany. The year is 1914. To finance World War I, Germany suspended the convertibility of the mark to gold. They believed the war would be short and paid for by the defeated Allies. They were wrong. By 1919, saddled with the crushing reparations of the Treaty of Versailles and a decimated industrial base, the government faced a binary choice: austerity and revolution, or printing and survival. They chose the printing press. The initial inflation was welcomed by industrialists who saw their debts evaporate, but the velocity of money soon took over. By 1923, the paper mark was worthless. A university professor found his life savings could not buy a cup of coffee. The social contract was incinerated. The middle class, the pillar of stability, was radicalized, paving the way for extremism. The incentive to print was politically rational in the short term, but fatal in the long term. The pattern repeats in 7 distinct stages. Stage 1 is sound money, where the currency is backed by a tangible asset or strict discipline. Stage 2 is expansion, where the state increases spending to fund wars or social programs. Stage 3 is the debt overhang, where liabilities exceed the tax base. Stage 4 is debasement, the moment the state begins to dilute the currency to service the debt. Stage 5 is financial repression, where interest rates are held below inflation to liquidate the debt in real terms. Stage 6 is the flight to real assets, where the population loses confidence and rushes into land, gold, and commodities. Stage 7 is the reset, where the old currency is abandoned or revalued. Just like the Weimar Republic, current data suggests we are deep into the later stages of this cycle. The signs are visible in the central bank balance sheets since 2008 and accelerating rapidly after 2020. The global monetary base has expanded at a pace that has no historical precedent in peacetime. Central banks are no longer just lenders of last resort, they are the markets. We see the Federal Reserve and its peers absorbing government debt, that the private market is increasingly reluctant to hold at current yields simultaneously. Central banks globally are buying gold at the fastest pace in decades. The incentive is clear. They are hedging their own paper. They are preparing for a world where the risk-free asset is no longer sovereign debt, but a neutral reserve asset. The flight to hard assets has already begun in the housing market, where prices have detached from wages, signaling that money is broken, not that houses are suddenly more valuable. Some economists argue that this time is different. They point to the exorbitant privilege of the US dollar as the world reserve currency, arguing that global demand for dollars is infinite, and that modern technology allows for infinite scalability of debt without inflation. They suggest that the sheer size of the modern economy can absorb this liquidity. However, the arithmetic is merciless. No reserve currency lasts forever. The average lifespan is roughly 90 to 100 years. The mechanism of the Triffin dilemma dictates that the issuer of the reserve currency must run trade deficits to supply the world with liquidity, eventually undermining confidence in the value of that currency. When interest payments on the national debt begin to rival defense spending or social security, the mathematical limit is reached. The only way to keep the system solvent is to print the difference, which accelerates the loss of confidence. The rational move for any sovereign holding dollar debt is to diversify, which is exactly what we see in the accumulation of gold by Eastern central banks. The endgame historically follows three paths. The first is controlled decline, often called financial repression. This is where inflation is allowed to run hot, perhaps for 6%, while interest rates are pegged lower. This transfers wealth from savers to the state, slowly liquidating the real value of the debt over a decade. It is a slow bleed. The second path is chaotic collapse. If the bond market vigilantes revolt and refuse to buy government debt, yields spike uncontrollably. The central bank is forced to buy everything, triggering a hyperinflationary loop. We saw this in 1923 Germany and 2008 Zimbabwe. It ends in total social fracture and the destruction of the currency. The third path is a reset and restructure. This usually involves a conference, a new agreement, and often a revaluation of gold or a link to a basket of commodities. We saw this in 1940 for at Bretton Woods, establishing the dollar standard. We saw it again in 1971, ending the gold window. Current discussions around central bank digital currencies suggest the infrastructure for the next restructure is already being laid. The only variable is timing and pain. If you want to understand how to navigate this shift, you must educate yourself on monetary history and data. Resilience comes from understanding the signal amidst the noise. Subscribe to continue this analysis.